So I think I'm doing this finally. After this is episode 4, and it's taken me 4 episodes to finally get this right. And the jury's still out, but at least I can get a response from Zach. So I'm gonna assume at least one person out there can hear me. So great. Um, I want to start off with a request from Mike. He wanted me to talk about steering positions, specifically hand positions on the steering wheel. So I'm going to start off with that, and then we'll get into what's the safest car or cars if you wanted to avoid all accidents. So, hand positions on the steering wheel. It's always been 9 and 3. I know. In the Colorado manual, it still says 10 and 2 or even 8 and 4. The reason it's always been 9 and 3 is 9 and 3 is the only position that you can do 180 degrees of accident avoidance without moving your hands. If you're at 10 and 2, 11 and 1, 12, 8 and 4, you're not going to be able to, in an emergency situation, get the same amount of steering rotation as you can with 9 and 3. So you would do 9 and 3 pretty much all the time. You would do hand over hand steering if you're going to do U-turns, oversteering slides, or parallel parking. You can really do either. Any situation where you have to turn a lot in a very short space, you would use hand over hand because it's the fastest steering. Now, the most preferred type of steering is called threading, or if you're from a law enforcement background, it's going to be shuffle steering or push-pull steering. That's what you would use for right turns, left turns, twisty, curvy mountain roads. You can use it for parallel parking. Any of those, it's going to be the best because, again, let's say you're on a twisty, curvy mountain road and somebody goes into your lane and your hands are at 9 and 3, even though your wheels are slightly turned, you're going to be able to avoid a head-on collision with 180 degrees of steering lock instead of less. If your hands are crossed, if your hands are together, at 9 and 10, because it's a left-hand turn, you're going to be able to do very little to avoid the actual accident. So 9 and 3 is going to pretty much always be the preferred position for your hands. Threading is going to be the preferred steering method for right turns, left turns, twisty, curvy roads. Again, parallel parking, you can do either. It doesn't really matter. And save the hand over hand for acute oversteering slides, U-turns, or parallel parking, or 3-point turns where you don't have a lot of space. So, Mike, I hope that covers satisfactorily proper hand position on the wheel. Types of wheels, I prefer the flat bottom, round everywhere else type of wheel. It gives you a little bit more leg room if you like the steering wheel a little bit lower, and it's still pretty symmetrical. I've got a square steering wheel. It's not perfectly square in the C8, and it kind of cuts off my view of my turn signals and some of the gauges. So, Chevy, if you're listening, for the Z06, if you could round the top of the wheel and keep the bottom flat, that would be great. I'm sure they're listening, and I'm sure they're writing down. Yeah, that Pettiford guy said, let's make the steering wheel a little rounder on top. If I only had that kind of power. So, okay, let's go to what car would give you, what types of cars, not a specific car, but what types of cars would give you the biggest advantage in an emergency situation, or make it easier for you to avoid all accidents. So if you have an opinion on this, go ahead and type it into the comments. I'm going to start with my little spiel that there's two types of safety. There's active safety and passive safety as far as cars go. Passive safety is how well you survive an accident. Active safety is your ability to avoid an accident altogether. I'm a big fan of active safety. Um, I will acknowledge that there are better vehicles if you're going to get hit to have. However, I'm going to go with the avoidance, because then you don't ever have to have an accident to see if you're going to survive or not. And accidents are so diverse. There's so many different elements in a particular accident, that your survival is going to depend almost more on those elements than the vehicle that you're in. Let me give you an example. Let's say you weighed 80 pounds and you're walking across the street, and a motorcycle that weighs 800 pounds hits you. Well, the motorcycle's going to win pretty much 100% of the time. Now, that same motorcyclist him and his motorcycle weighs 800 pounds. If they get hit by an SUV that weighs 8,000 pounds, the SUV is going to win. This is basic physics 101. Now, if that SUV that weighs 8,000 pounds gets hit by a tractor trailer that weighs 80,000 pounds, the tractor trailer is going to win. And if that tractor trailer gets hit by a train that weighs almost 300,000 pounds, the train's going to win. So mass or weight times velocity is usually going to produce the winner of any actual accident where vehicles come together. But here's the problem. If you have, let's say, an SUV that weighs 8,000 pounds, it takes longer to stop it. And if you have to do a swerve, since it has a higher center of gravity, it's going to have more of a propensity to roll over or to not corner very well. So in the event that let's say you go into one of the clover leaves a little hot, you're on a highway and you didn't read the sign, and the sign said 20, and you went in at 40, and you're in your SUV with the big mud tires. Well, when that happens, because of the vehicle that you've put yourself at a higher risk to roll over or to not make the corner than if you had a lower center of gravity vehicle in that particular situation. And of course, if you had to stop in the shortest distance, typically a vehicle that weighs more is going to take longer to stop. So if you were, let's say you're going, 25 miles an hour in a residential area, and you don't see a kid and he jumps right out in front of you, and you have to stop in the shortest distance by the laws of physics. Well, if you're in an SUV or a pickup truck, compared to a low center of gravity all-wheel drive car or a sports car with sticky tires, it's going to take you longer to stop in the SUV or the pickup truck than it will in the other two types of vehicles. And that could mean the difference between, in my example, hitting the kid or stopping in a short enough distance to avoid that accident altogether. So when I recommend vehicles, and I do that a fair amount to parents that I'm teaching their kid driver education, or people that have had accidents in the past and want to reduce their risk, what I often recommend is a low center of gravity all-wheel drive vehicle. A lot of people have been told that SUVs are the safest vehicles. Well, from an accident avoidance point of view, that's not really true, because they do take longer to stop and they do have a higher center of gravity, and both of those things put you at a disadvantage. I have two 1-ton crew cab dually pickup trucks that haul things and tow things very well, but they don't stop and they don't really turn very well. So I only drive them when I'm hauling or towing. So let's see here. I'm so glad we've got comments. Let's see, Jay, here in Muleshoe, Texas, with Race Dog. Now that is a Texas town, buddy. Muleshoe, Texas. Oh yeah. If I ever go through Muleshoe, Texas, I'll have to get a cowboy hat because it sounds like a serious Texas town. Let's see, Daryl. Okay, let's see here. Are you a proponent of thinking about what would you do if something happened in front of you before it happens? Kind of mentally preparing if it happens. In other words, it's better to react as you're thinking about it or to react without thinking about it. Okay. I am always a proponent of looking as far ahead as possible, as far behind as possible, left mirror, right mirror, read all the signs, check your gauges, get all the information that's available. If you're coming up to an intersection, notice pedestrians, bicyclists, skateboarders. What street are you on? How many lanes are there? Do the signs and the markings on the road correspond? Most of the time they do. Some of the time they don't. Some of the time the traffic engineers went out on a bender before they designed a particular intersection, and it's still that way today. I'm thinking of Arapahoe and Foothills Parkway in Boulder. There's three or four lanes, and they go right and then left and then right and then left. And you're like, come on, guys, couldn't you have just, marked this out and put four straight lines and made it easy? So I'm a big proponent of always looking for clues of potential hazards and going through the what ifs and always having a plan B. Yes. Ron Douglas, my man. Let's see, literally drove through this morning. And you probably had your cowboy hat on, buddy, if I know you. And you were not doing speed limit, I can tell you that. And I would not have been doing speed limit either, going through Muleshoe, Texas. So anyway, that's what I think about that, and what I normally recommend. Some of the cars that I'll recommend that will give you an advantage in an emergency situation would be the low center of gravity Subarus. A lot of people don't like Subarus because in Colorado, a lot of people have Subarus. But for the money, it's kind of hard to beat a Subaru with the lower center of gravities. In other words, the Outbacks are a little high center of gravities. The SUV, the Tribecas, they're a little high. I'm talking about the Legacies, the Imprezas. Those have the BRZs, of course, but the BRZs aren't all-wheel drive; they're rear-wheel drive. So any of those I recommend just because I've had Subarus. They were reliable. They didn't cost a lot when things went wrong with them. And they were pretty fun to drive. I had a couple of Wagons, a Spec B, WRX STI, and they were all fun to drive. And they were all reliable. What I've got now that qualifies is a Golf R. Now, I also had a Focus RS. All of those are pretty low center of gravity, all-wheel drive, sporty, but still very practical cars. Um, I was just looking at a video of the new Audi RS6 versus the Mercedes E63S wagons. And if I ever get 150,000 large just sitting around in my living room when all the bills are paid, I will definitely have one of those, maybe both. That's usually the way I do it. If I can't decide, I buy both of them and I test them, and then I sell the one that isn't quite as much fun or doesn't have quite as good a performance. Because in my garage, performance is king. If you ain't the fastest, you're for sale. When I leave my garage, all of the cars go, okay, am I still the fastest? Am I going to be here tomorrow? It's a tough garage. But let's see. Daryl Wilson, do you teach different driving techniques for front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, and all wheel drive? Absolutely. It's especially on the track, but on the street as well and in adverse conditions. That's a very good question. It needs to be said that all wheel drive is going to be the best as far as acceleration and cornering in adverse conditions like snow and ice and even rain to an extent. And the reason for that is obviously 3 or 4 wheels pulling or subdividing power equally on all 4 wheels is going to give you a little bit more stability. Now, the downside of having an all-wheel drive car is it's going to weigh a little bit more and it's going to take it typically a little bit longer to stop. So in the dry, that's why oftentimes a rear wheel drive car or even a front wheel drive car will be a little faster than an all wheel drive car. The front wheel drive car has to be set up properly so that it turns. That we could do a whole hour on that, but the short version would be you have to have the rear stiff enough so that the car will turn in and doesn't understeer on turn in or on exit. If you can get it to do that, then the car can be every bit as fast as a rear wheel drive car. And we're talking about cars that have, around 300 horsepower ish. When you get to a lot of horsepower, you won't see very many 700 plus horsepower front wheel drive cars that go fast around a racetrack or a road course, because they're just not going to be able to hook up the power. And the front tires are going to be doing so much work that they're not going to last very long on cars that have that much power. But at around 300 horsepower or less, you can set up a car and they'll have a little bit less parasitic drag. The front wheel drive cars will, just because they don't have to have the drive shaft and the rear diff and all of that stuff. And all of that stuff puts more parasitic drag on the drive line, and that takes away horsepower. In a front wheel drive car, the difference between um, brake horsepower at the motor and wheel horsepower actually to the wheels is going to be less of a difference than a front engine rear drive car, just because you've got fewer moving parts. Let's see, Tom. Hi, Ollie. Let me know when you get your Corvette so you won't have to be envious of me with mine. Then you too can have payments. You'll probably pay cash. But anyway, yeah, welcome to the club. A 2017 Impala, Tom. Yeah, that's a good car. I believe that's a front wheel drive car. And yeah, it's low center of gravity. Put some good winter tires on it if you're into the snowstorm. And yeah, that would be an acceptable car. As we've already talked about in a previous episode, we got kind of in depth on tires. So tires can make pretty much any car a much better car in the snow, whether it's front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, or all wheel drive. Still, all wheel drive is going to have an advantage under acceleration and a little bit of a disadvantage under braking. But a lot of people don't realize if you have, let's say, a sports car, um, and you put winter tires on it, good winter tires, and you put a little bit more weight in the back, like sand or whatever, kitty litter, whatever, that car is going to be dramatically better in the snow and even in the ice, than it would be normally. I mean, I had a Camaro, and it wasn't very good in the snow at all until I got a set of winter tires and put extra weight in the back, and then it surprised me. I mean, it still wasn't good as an all-wheel drive vehicle with winter tires, but it was dramatically better. It would go a lot of places. Um, so it's about the tires. So if you've got Tom, if you've got winter tires on your 2017 Impala in Michigan, I'm from South Bend, Indiana, originally. So yeah, when it gets cold and wintry there, it stays that way. It's not. See, in Colorado, we'll have a week of cold weather, and then it'll get up to like 50 or 60 and melt everything, and then it'll snow the next day and then warm up. So that's why we don't have as many bugs as they do in South Texas. Let's see, Ron Douglas. Why is all-wheel drive? Yes, exactly, precisely. Disadvantage in braking. Yep, it's the additional weight. If you're putting another diff in a vehicle, that can be 500 pounds depending on the car, and you've got to stop that. So that's why My pickup trucks are 2-wheel drive with limited slip. So mine are much lighter. I think my dualies are like 7,250 pounds. And the new ones, I got to drive the new Dodge and the new Chevy recently. And boy, what nice trucks they are. You would have been happy. You would have thought I looked pretty cool in that Dodge, buddy. I'm pretty sure. Um, but yeah, my trucks in theory should outstop the new trucks just because the new trucks weigh probably over 1,000 pounds more than my older 2-wheel drive 1-ton crew cab dually. So yeah, and it's all of this. It's all physics 101. I mean, if you're looking to try to have an advantage in an emergency situation, here's the way I would describe it, and here's the way that I describe it to parents. If you had two vehicles and one from 60 miles an hour could stop in 80 feet, and the other one it took 100 feet to stop, which would be the safer vehicle and which vehicle would give you an advantage in an emergency situation? Well, obviously, the vehicle that can stop in the shortest distance. If you had 20 extra feet in an emergency, you probably would be able to avoid the accident. Likewise, if you had one car that, went 0 to 60 in 35 seconds and you had another car that went 0 to 60 in 10 seconds, obviously the one that would accelerate faster would be the safer car. For instance, if you're at a two-way stop, you look left, you look right, you look left, you look right again. You're 100% sure that there's nobody there and it's safe to go out. You pull out, and to this day, you don't know where that truck came from because you just looked for it. Now, your ability to avoid a rear end accident is going to be directly relational to how fast your car accelerates. So, if you think that a slow car is a safer car, sorry, it's not. Now, you don't have to go crazy. you, you don't need 755 horsepower like some of us have. That would be overkill. But you want to have, I would like to say, if you can get something with 200 horsepower, that's going to be adequate. 175. I mean, some of the Subarus have 175, 200, all of that. That's a minimum. I like to have kind of 300 or 400 as a good, not a minimum, but a good, nice accelerating car, just in case I want to pass something on a 2-lane highway, or if it's really congested traffic and there's a smaller space and I can get in there and get up to speed and not slow down the other traffic. And I think that's safer. And then, of course, as we've already talked about, um, if you have a high center of gravity vehicle, you're just not going to be able to change directions and or corner and or swerve in an emergency. If you get a chance, Google the Moose report. What it is they test all kinds of vehicles at 43 miles an hour, and it's as if they saw a moose, and they swerve left and then they swerve right very abruptly. And here's a clue. High center of gravity vehicles don't do as well as low center of gravity vehicles. It's physics 101. One of the vehicles even swerved, lifted up on two wheels, and it put so much pressure on the opposite front tire that it blew the tire as it was up on two wheels. And this was at 43 miles an hour. And the only reason it didn't flip all the way over is because it had a professional driver in it. So again, a lot of people, and to be fair, I get it. If you live on a ranch or you live out in the hinterlands and you've got, a foot of snow, you're going to have a high center of gravity vehicle to get out of your driveway. I get that. Just like if I'm carrying a load of tires or I'm going to hook up to a 48-foot trailer, I'm going to take the truck, and the truck is really high center of gravity, doesn't stop very well, doesn't turn very well. It goes pretty good, and I'll be at a disadvantage. But I'm at a disadvantage because I have no choice, not because that is my choice, um, you know, as a daily driver. So I guess that's my point. A lot of people could have vehicles that give them much more of an advantage in day to day driving because they don't live on a ranch, they don't pull a boat or a big trailer. They just like sitting up high and the way that it feels. Ron, I think you and I have had this conversation. So let's see here. Okay, Daryl. A car comes out of, say, an alley in front of you. Is it better to accelerate slightly and steer around it, or hit your brakes and try to stop before hitting it? Excellent question. It depends. It depends on where you are compared to where the car is. In other words, let's go through all three scenarios just really quickly. If you see the car in enough time that you can emergency brake or emergency brake and swerve, then you should do that. In other words, if the car pulls out in front of you and you have a little bit of time to do that. Let's say that you're next to the car and you look to your right side and the car is not looking and it just pops out of the alley. Then engage the turbos, my friend, and accelerate because you want to get out of the path of travel so that you're not going to be T-boned by this car that never even saw you. And if it's somewhere in the middle and you have a multi-lane, then maybe you'll swerve into the other lane. Or if the car goes across your bow and you can swerve to the right and maybe go up on the sidewalk if there is a sidewalk or on the shoulder of the road. you know it's going to depend on the specifics, but any of those. And you can also, if you have enough um, advance warning, beep the horn. If it's at night, flash the lights. All of those can work depending on the scenario. So that's what I would advise. Let's see here. Joe Rothman, Daryl, never do something that will make you crash faster, brake, and steer away. Okay. Not always, but that can work sometimes as well. Can I watch the TV while driving, Shannon? You can. It'll hurt pretty bad, but yes, you can. This is America. It's a free country. You have the power of the decision, and those that live by the sword die by the sword. I could tell you many examples of poor decisions that I've made over the years, but we don't have enough time for that. Let's see. Daryl to Joe, you have more control under acceleration than braking. Again, that depends as well. Light acceleration versus light braking, I would say you probably have an equal amount of control, especially if you do it properly, if you do it smoothly. If you do something abruptly, one of the reasons that we go over emergency situations in my super safety street course is so that you'll have an immediate reflex and you don't have to think about stuff. For instance, if you have a system brake failure, what do you do? Most people have never thought of it. What happens if you have your throttle stick? What do you do? Now your vehicle's accelerating at full power and you hadn't planned on that. Most people, it takes them by surprise. They go into panic mode, and sometimes it ends up in a really bad accident. What do you do at a two-way stop where you pulled out as far as you can possibly pull out and you can't see? We do one wheel off-road recoveries. What do you do on a downhill icy road if you can't stop and you're going very, very slowly? We go over all these things in the class over and over and over because we want the people to have a reflex instead of going into panic mode. If you're in panic mode, you're probably not thinking as clearly as you could. So that's why we go over all that stuff. Let's see. Talk about braking with a trailer and fishtailing. Yes. As if that's happened to both of us, I'm sure. One of the things that you can do if your trailer starts to fishtail, one of the most common ways that can happen is if you have an enclosed trailer and you're passing a big semi. There's a side thrust of air that you'll feel in the steering, and when you feel that, you want to counteract or counter steer in the direction that you want the vehicle to go. And it'll be very subtle at first, but if your steering gets out of phase, it can amplify it. And that's where it becomes very dangerous. So you want to steer in the direction and catch it. That will dampen it out. Another thing you can do, if you think about it, is apply additional trailer brake. If you've got a long trailer, you can apply a little bit of additional trailer brake, and that will pull it straight a little bit from the rear. Of course, the better way to do it too is to load your trailer properly so that you have enough tongue weight so it's not going to destabilize as easily from a side thrust of wind, whether it's just a crosswind or whether you're passing a big semi. So that's what works for me, and I've done that, boy, especially on some icy roads. One time I thought it would be a really good idea to pass the plows going over Raton Pass. Not a good idea. my my thought was if I got enough momentum, I could go up the hill. Well, it was slippery enough that I didn't get as much momentum as I thought. And I ended up having a Dodge truck pull my Chevy truck and trailer up the rest of the way, of which I got out of the Chevy truck and bowed to the Dodge and then got back in and said thank you. But anyway, yeah, Shannon, knee draggers. Yep, love it, love it. Kind of miss MRA racing, but that's another story. Emilio, cool. Glad you're tuning in there, buddy, from Florida. Beautiful downtown Florida. Well, that's cool. And a marathon driver. I'm impressed. I used to be able to drive 24 hours at a time. I don't know. I probably still could, but I would probably hurt myself. I've gotten kind of spoiled over the years. So now when we go to a race, we alternate drivers, and when my crew guy Josh uh, starts driving, I usually go to sleep or just kind of chill until it's my turn, and that makes it a lot easier. And we get there much more easily. So anyway, let's see, back to vehicles. So low center of gravity, reasonable horsepower, 200, 175 minimum, good tires. We talked about tires in depth, but obviously this time of year, if you have winter tires without studs, that's probably the best, unless you're just, in the hinterlands or you're up at high elevation. I mean, if you live in Vale or Steamboat, okay, you know, it's okay to have the little cleats in your tires and make that noise that on the dry pavement everybody looks like, really, man? So, and then the condition of your vehicle also is important. If your car needs brakes, if your car needs tires, if you've got a check engine light that's been on for, a month, you need to get it checked out, get it fixed if at all possible. I know everybody's not made of money, but oftentimes if you keep your car in good shape and you can avoid one accident, then, that's going to save you money as well. Zach, so no Corvairs then, eh? Well, I mean, I got to drive some Corvairs when I was much younger, and the turbo ones, they were actually pretty cool, but they did some weird stuff in cornering with that. I think they had a swing axle, and of course, books were written about unsafe at any speed and that kind of stuff. And I didn't subscribe to any of those books, by the way. And I had a lot of fun driving a Corvair, but I never really had to have one. They were fun to drive, but I never really had to have one. But they were mid-engine, rear engine, so and low center of gravity, so they would have done all right as far as accident avoidance. Back then, the um, the brakes were not that great. I think the turbos had disc brakes in the front, but I think you could still get drum brakes on the front. Um, don't quote me on that. But nowadays, I mean, the vehicles that are around nowadays are already light years ahead of some of the stuff that we used to drive in the '60s and that kind of stuff. Um, Although I mean, I was raised with muscle cars, so I'm a muscle car guy. But the cars are just uh, are just better now. They're easier to drive. They do everything better. They're safer if you get in an accident because of the crumple zones. The seat belts are better. The side airbags are better. Nowadays you get into a, a head-on collision, the car will destroy itself so that you can walk away. Back in the old days, if you had the old Cadillacs with the airplane bazooka bumpers and you hit a brick wall, the brick wall would yield, but all that energy went directly to the driver. And the car wasn't damaged as much, but a lot more drivers were injured or killed because there wasn't the energy dissipation um, of the current cars. So I like to drive the old cars, but I'm glad we have the new cars. The new cars are better. The books were a hit job. Agreed, Mike. Oh, your dad had one that that caught on fire, parked. You'll have to tell me that story. You'll call me, not don't write it all out, but yeah, call me and tell me the story. It was probably, well, I'd like to hear it. And Shannon, you had a 510. Yeah, those were cool. I really like those cars. I mean, yes, of course, they could have had more horsepower, but yeah, I've driven those on the track in a vintage capacity. And I remember let's see, the Datsun 1600s and the Datsun 2000s. And the reason that I remember the 2000 convertibles is because back then I had a Chevy Vega that I thought was the fastest car in the world. And after trying to pick a race with a Datsun 2000, I was educated. I was going to teach that Datsun a lesson, and a lesson was taught, but I was not the teacher. So I found out that I found out that a lot of stuff could beat a Chevy Vega. But anyway, yes, and the 240Z, buddy. Yep, those were cool. Ron had a 240Z. I had a roommate that had a 240Z, and for their time, I think they were one of the coolest foreign cars out there because that shape, and you could put stuff in them. You know, they had a hatchback, so they were pretty practical cars. You know, and a 4-speed gearbox, and then they kind of fattened them up, and they had the 240. I thought was the best. The 260 and a little heavier. The 280 was really heavy, and then they did the 2+2. I didn't really care for that. And then they switched to the 300ZX, and then the twin turbo 300ZX. That was kind of cool. And I still remember the Super Bowl commercial where the guy's driving a Turbo Z and everybody's trying to chase him. And they only showed it, I think, once or twice. And a guy on a motorcycle is trying to chase him. And then a guy in a car is trying to chase him. And he says, they just can't catch me. And then they take a plane, and the plane's trying to catch me. And the twin turbo just kicks in, and you see this plane flying about, 10 seconds after the car goes by. One of the best commercials I ever saw. But they only played it like once or twice because they thought it was irresponsible or something silly like that. But it was a cool commercial. And Shannon, you had 3 of them? Really? I'd like to hear some of those stories too. And you bought one from Quinn. Okay. I did not know he had one. Cool. They were neat cars. And I've got to drive them with the V8s in them. Those were pretty cool conversions as well. I got to drive a Jaguar, E-type Jaguar with a V8 in it. That was kind of a cool conversion with disc brakes all around and wider wheels and tires, and kind of a resto-ish mod on an old classic car. And I think that's kind of cool as well. A lot of people are doing that. A buddy of mine's got a 63 Corvette with a '04 Z06 chassis underneath it. So if you're in the car driving it, it drives just like a Corvette Z06, an '04, but on the outside, it looks like a C1 or a 50s Corvette. And yeah, there you go. The twin turbo. Is that the I can't play it. I can't play it and do a live, but once we get off, if I'm gonna look up that commercial because it's really cool. Um, so anyway, let's get back to the topic. I'm so glad I'm getting messages this time. This is much better than ironically the first one we did. I could get messages, and then I messed it up the next 2 times. And now I think we'll know next Tuesday that I've got the hang of it. So if you want a car that gives you the best advantage in an emergency situation, here's what you want to get: a medium to high horsepower, low center of gravity, all-wheel drive car in a bright color like white or yellow or orange, so people can see you. That will give you an advantage as well. Although anybody that knows me knows that I love a black car. Mine is not always clean, But on those rare moments that it is, I just think nothing looks better than a nicely polished all black car. I mean, with some graphics on it or some kind of a contrast, not just black on black. So that's what I would recommend. Again, I'm a proponent of active safety, not passive safety. If you get hit by a semi, it doesn't really matter if you were in an SUV or a pickup or a motorcycle. The results are pretty much the same. There's also a video that you can Google, horrible SUV truck crash. And what it shows is a guy, it was on a winter day, and he went across the center line just as a tractor trailer was coming the other direction. And it looks like a magic trick where it disappears. So, so that's what I would recommend. Let's see, Ron. Okay, thoughts on a 2000 Mercedes CDI diesel. Okay, and I think that's a rear drive car. I like the diesel for mileage. I'm hooked on diesels for mileage and power. With winter tires, yes. If you're out there on the ranch, the center of gravity might be a little low. But yeah, with the proper tires, and Mercedes, you know, they're constructed very well as far as the passive safety aspect. So yeah, that would be kind of cool. Yeah, 40 miles per gallon and top speed, what, 120? I mean, I don't think it's very fast. But when you're getting 40 miles per gallon, that's okay. And yeah, Shannon, X5 twin turbo, yeah, that would work, but it's still high center of gravity and it's still kind of heavy. How about an Audi RS6 or a Mercedes E63S wagon instead of the X5? Lower center of gravity, even more power, better maneuverability, and even more space. Some of those wagons, especially the Mercedes wagon, they have actually more space to haul stuff, to put stuff in, not really to haul stuff, than some of the SUVs that are about the same size. So, you know, some of the people may want to consider wagons and instead of SUVs, because wagons can be more practical. Or if you've got to have a big space, get a van. They make all-wheel drive vans that, again, lower center of gravity. Now, it's not going to be as cool looking, but look, if you got 5 kids or more, the coolness is going to go out the window a little bit for the practicality. So, you know, consider those things. And Ron just said he'll let me know the top speed. You know the top speed of my Golf Turbo diesel wagon, buddy. So you know that number. Let me keep me posted on what the Mercedes does, and and we'll have to bring it out to the track and see what it does. So anyway, we've been talking for about an hour, and if you've had half as much fun as me, you've had a ball. So I appreciate everybody that sent me a comment. Hopefully, I got a chance to answer all of the questions and give you some good information. Let me know of topics that you'd like for me to talk about for episode 5 next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Um, Call me on the phone, 303-666-4113. Visit the website at go4itservices.com, and it's the number 4, not FOR. Go for it space TV is my YouTube channel. And we will see you next Tuesday at 7 p.m. So be safe out there. And for a moment, all will be right with the world. Go for it. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.